The protest in Iran is turned deadly, with cities leaving, with protests in cities resulting in over 500 people being dead, thousands arrested, and authorities have imposed a near total internet blackout, trying to keep information from exiting the country. Security forces have cracked down with force, and the situation is drawing international attention. President Trump warns the U.S. is weighing very strong options if the violence continues. Joining me now is Washington Stand reporter Casey Harper, who has been tracking this event today. Casey, what steps could the U.S. take? What's the president proposing, and what's Israel's reaction?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I mean, Iran has become so volatile at this point that any moves that President Trump takes could destabilize the region to a tipping point. Now, what are those options he has? Well, of course, he has military strikes, which he's considering. Those could be very targeted or more widespread. There's also cyber attacks where they can work in the infrastructure. There's talks with Elon Musk about providing internet to the region to allow some other information to get in, because right now, because of the internet blackout you mentioned, it's pretty much just propaganda all the time. Of course, sanctions, which is something that Iran is very familiar with. But President Trump said he's also in contact with the Iranian opposition and that Tehran has reached out to talk. Here's what President Trump had to say.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
Now, meanwhile, Israel is pressuring Iran, but they're also worried about regional escalation, something that Turkey has also expressed concern about, though Turkey, as you know, Tony, usually doesn't share interests with the U.S. and Israel.
All right, Casey, I would agree. Turkey's involvement is concerning as they seek to leverage instability in that region, so I would watch them very carefully. I think it's one thing it's important to point out. Iran has a very vibrant Christian community, which has faced brutal persecution that has only increased in recent years. And I think, you know, one of the things we can do here at home, we're going to talk more about this in a bit, but I think we need to be praying for Christians and the innocent civilians that are suffering. We're going to talk to Dr. Hormoz Shariat a little bit later. So Casey, let's move on to another part of the world that seems to be filled with unrest. Venezuela, Cuba have also been on the president's radar. What's the latest in terms of the discussion of U.S. policy toward those countries?
Yeah, Tony, this is something the Washington Stand has been covering, and you have to think that Cuba is looking at this situation very differently since the deposition of Venezuela's Maduro. And with that backdrop and that context, President Trump has warned Cuba, hey, you're not going to keep getting that Venezuelan oil that you've grown used to, or that Venezuelan money, because Cuba is so isolated, they've relied on Venezuela for many years. And Trump is calling on Cuban leaders to make a deal. Now, the Cuban president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, they denied that there's any kind of ongoing talks with Washington, and they also pushed back on what they perceived as threats from President Trump. And of course, this all comes against this new backdrop in the region, Tony, now that the deposition of Maduro has changed the game south of our border.
All right. Let's switch gears here very quickly. Let's talk about Minnesota. Federal agents fired tear gas to disperse bystanders near an immigration enforcement scene just blocks from where the woman was fatally shot last week. How is the city responding as the Trump administration, Homeland Security, is sending more federal agents, and the Justice Department is actually ramping up the fraud investigation?
Yeah, that's right, Tony. So the Minneapolis mayor has been very clear from the beginning. He doesn't want ICE in his city. He blames ICE for the chaos. He says they're sowing chaos in the streets by being there, and we're definitely seeing some chaos. Federal officers, in fact, used tear gas today to break up protests, which are not just in Minneapolis by the thousands, but around the country. But the Trump administration is really doubling down. They're sending more and more federal agents to the streets to secure the situation. It's kind of a cycle where the protests of the officers lead to more officers because of security concerns. And as you mentioned, that fraud that in Minneapolis that started all this is now getting significant federal scrutiny as there's a new federal department to investigate the fraud, not just in Minnesota, but around the country, Tony.
Well, I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon.
No.
Casey, thanks so much for bringing us an update.
Tony.